I'm back and I've got a different white balance, so some colour. So, one of my viewers, who is actually my uncle, recommended, and maybe I take it as a bit of a request, that I tell a bit of my story. So, how do I start? He was saying something like from punk to monk. And I would say that I was never a punk, but I wasn't not a punk. I was kind of, even then I was open-minded. I was kind of hanging around with some people who would dress up as punks. I would hear punk music at school, like the Sex Pistols played over the school radio, which was funny because it was kind of a Catholic school at that time. And then later I changed to another sort of religious school, but it was one that didn't have uniforms, and it was had girls and boys together, co-ed, and everyone. It was not disciplinarian, and that was good because that helped me finally get back to a kind of more artistic, open, relaxed sort of place. So I went to university, and when I went to university I was studying computing because I already pretty much knew how to program computers since I was about 10 years old, and I thought it was probably a good career. But during university I just got into playing music to kind of relax and have fun, and by the time I finished university I was always having to hide the guitar because I was just playing it all the time to cope with the stress of studying and cramming for exams. So I finished uni and I finally said, well, I've got a very employable situation. I've got a degree and in computer science, so now I just play music for a while. I mean, I had some jobs near the end of university. I had to go to have a night job and use that to pay off the cost of living. My parents thought it would be better if I had a job than just pay my way for another year of university. And then I think I had a few jobs while I was learning to play music. I wasn't making any money. Occasionally I kind of got with a friend and I would go busking, and which is just playing in the mall for tips. Didn't really get far with that. But then I kind of broke it off into playing guitar in cafes that were looking for free entertainers, and we would pass the hat around there, and I did well with that. And in fact, I was part of a little bit of a busking and cafe movement when it was just sort of manifesting naturally before it all blew up into a big cafes everywhere doing the same thing and having paid entertainers. It was like a bit of a... Before that, Brisbane was very different. It wasn't like... Brisbane is where I was living at that time in Australia, and it was kind of different from other cities. It didn't have a big cafe sitting outdoors on sidewalks like most European cities, and Melbourne is like very European style. But suddenly it changed. And anyway, from there I became more and more competent over time as a guitar player, and eventually I had a series of bands, and I made full income, not a good income, but not bad either. More than unemployment benefits, maybe triple unemployment benefit sometimes, and sometimes not. And I'm sure that put my parents through quite a lot of pain. But the thing is that I always, the reason why I'm telling this story is I always look at that period because it was hard. I was going against the grain. I was going against the get a job, get a career, get a house, get married. I was just completely sort of contrary to those goals. In fact, I was repelled by seeing it happen with my friends, or people I grew up went to school with. As they kind of just transform very quickly into something unrecognizable, and I guess I looked like something that they didn't want to be either, so parted ways and made other friends. Most of my friends were musicians. Yes, and then I, as a musician, I had a lot of difficult experiences because working in bars, you see a lot of suffering. And also I was trying to develop my own songs, so I was observing life and writing about things, slowly becoming a songwriter, as you do. And then towards the end, I got a job again. I just wasn't feeling very healthy and I needed money. I needed to work in bars less. So I sort of cut that back to a few nights a week and had a full-time day job and worked on my original music. And that was when I became interested in Buddhism. In fact, I think that had been growing actually. It wasn't just suddenly. It was like over about 5 or 6 years leading up to where I got a full-time job and then cut back on the music. I was working in a record company, so it was like I was able to back down enough because I stayed in the music industry sort of, even though I ended up doing like art for a while, designing CD covers. My brother got me that job, and then I could see that they needed a lot of help with their computing, so I became their IT manager and got them out of sort of the grips of their old IT manager who was just drifting away. And so anyway, that seemed like, according to all the Buddhist things, I was looking at right livelihood, okay? Right livelihood is something non-harmful, like being a butcher is considered a harmful livelihood, or selling arms, guns, weapons is not a good livelihood, because they're all involved in killing or helping people to kill. And so selling alcohol and bars is not exactly right livelihood. So I slowly didn't like my job. And then I had some really difficult experiences where I really saw a lot of suffering of drunk people, and so all these things coming together. Also seeing my job, which I thought, oh, this is just a record company that's selling music, seems like a fairly good livelihood. They were quite exploitative of artists, and I felt that in the heart because I was a musician, I was a songwriter. So that didn't sit right with me. And so reading and studying the Dharma, and eventually also I had a relationship that I was quite intense for me, almost 6 months to a year, which broke my heart so badly that I had these Dharma texts as a sort of support to recover emotionally from that heartbreak. And I always found very inspiring all the story of Buddha and his life. So I ended up changing at some point. I saw this teacher called I'm going to say what he was called then, which I don't call him now, Sogyal Rinpoche. And I'd been studying with these Chinese Buddhists, so it was very difficult with translations. They taught in Chinese most of the time. And you often got only a few words of translation when they spoke Chinese for paragraphs, so it just felt very limiting. And so when I saw this fairly charismatic teacher speaking in English, and he was Tibetan, you know, they got me very strongly from the beginning. And I also had only very limited sort of exposure to Buddhist philosophy and books related to it, and suddenly I found myself in this whole world of Tibetan Buddhism and books and teachers, going to retreats and listening, and they seemed very wise and open. They would let students ask all kinds of questions and give pretty good answers, it seemed like. And you'll hear this bit of skepticism in my tone talking about the past. I mean, back then I wouldn't have been as skeptical. I was actually quite impressed to the openness and of investigation, and I thought, oh, it's good. So anyway, I ended up hearing that they were looking for people to get ordained, and I thought, you know, I'm living like a monk already. I was slowly, due to my Buddhist study, I was getting myself away from cigarettes and alcohol and weed and other kind of substances, and I was just cleaning myself up more and more. I had to kind of do it in the right order, get off alcohol, and because every time I would try to quit smoking, if I would have a beer, I would end up smoking again, which most people would know if they'd been in a similar situation. So I got rid of alcohol, then I got rid of cigarettes, and eventually had my last weed. And then, yeah, and then I was going to retreats, and I ended up going to France to be part of this community, and that was very inspiring. I mean, in those days it was very like what you would expect. There was people living on a mountain, not many of them. It wasn't easy, and we were helping each other, working closely. This teacher would come back in the summer and give a series of retreats, and other teachers would come. So you would see the who's who of Tibetan Buddhism, all these different teachers from around the world, and there was no question in my mind that it was legit. And yeah, I was enjoying all the philosophy immensely. And to cut a long story short, I was a monk for 14 years there, but then just before 14 years of being a monk, I kind of left, feeling a sense that things are going very badly with this teacher. He wasn't really doing his job as a teacher, and worse, he was hurting people from what I could see, and that's a very long story, but it was hard to accept, but I had to accept it. I saw in the eyes of a lot of students a lot of psychological damage, and I saw it in myself, even the same, and that was when I realized that I had to make a break. But it didn't happen very quickly. It took me more than a year to really gather myself enough to actually walk away. And once I walked away, people trusted me and told me more and more what had happened and what they'd seen, and you know, crimes against them, and I ended up with a group of students writing this letter and exposing this teacher. And then so that was the last few years have been about me living in overseas, independently most of the time, occasionally going home to Australia, staying at my parents', or recently I was house sitting at a friend in Sydney who let me stay there. So that's my story up until recently, sort of in brief, and I don't know if I'll go into too much detail, but that's who I am. So I'm no stranger to having to be open and minded and to the point of actually like living those things. They're open-minded about being a musician, about being a Buddhist monk, and trying it out. In the case of that monk experience, possibly for many years too long before I got out of that. But you know, when you vow to be a monk, it's a lifelong commitment, so not so easy to break a commitment that you make yourself. But I did end up giving the vows back, as they say, rather than breaking them to the point where they're not healable. I decided, okay, I have to respect the tradition and the vows. So I offered the vows back. But then I ended up traveling to the north of Thailand that year that I gave my vows back. That giving my vows back, actually, that was a bit of the end of a lot of close friendships with other students that I'd studied the Dharma with in this organization living in France. I think that some people were disappointed in me, whereas others came forward and became very compassionate and supportive and asked me why and listened. And so I got to see a whole flip of who are my friends and care about me versus who were just my friends of convenience because of being brothers and sisters in the Dharma. So basically, the Dharma organization I had been in, I came to see it as a cult. And I came to see that person, Sogyal Rinpoche, not as a precious teacher, which is what Rinpoche kind of means, but just, I call him Sogyal Laka when we exposed him, and ever since. And I see him as a narcissist. So I definitely will want to go through that as a topic, because you need to open your mind to what kind of people are out there in the world, and how dangerous it can be to you, especially if you're open-minded. Because those people, those narcissists, will want to take advantage of your open-mindedness, and that could be anywhere. Your boss, at your employer, your political groups that you might end up associating with, even if they're very old, they'll definitely have charismatic leaders, because that's politics. Politics in the workplace, same. And definitely religion. There's a lot of worship and respect for religious leaders, and who wants that? Narcissists. They go there. It's like a magnet for them. Just like musicians love applause, and I guess a lot of actors and famous people become quite narcissistic. They may not be completely damaged in that way, but their whole world is about that, being an icon, famous, having fans, and if it changes them, as you know, if you've been around, you know how people change when they're famous. Yeah, so open-mindedness is also a healing thing. You need to be able to, once you get a shock to the system, you need to be able to reevaluate everything you learned in the past, so that you're not just getting tossed by emotions and rejecting everything that useful that you might have heard just because it was misused as a tool by people who wanted to control you. They may have used partial truths or many truths mixed with partial like twists in logic to hold you with a solid sounding philosophy, but misused and misdirected. That's why you need to be open-minded, so that you can break out of those kind of mistakes in your own thinking. Because in open-mindedness, you definitely have to look at it's you. It's always about. It's not about blaming others. It's about what you will decide to accept and what to reject, and what to just keep as information useful into the future.